Hi, everyone. Nice to see everybody here. Glad to have an opportunity. And like everybody else, I do have an open door and appreciate and value working with students. We work in an academic environment. We're here because we love students and value the input that we get and the mentoring experience. So I think, like for many of my colleagues, the door is open. So this little word salad here, I guess I can make it full screen if I knew there. Sort of describes a lot of what my interests have been and what my current work is. And I can divide it up into at least four groups and subgroups. But one major theme has been about migration and the impact of human population movement on the spread of disease. So that goes back to my dissertation work, which looked at how hotspots for transmission in South Africa were very related to movement of rural men to urban areas, and the system of apartheid sent those men back, which was highly conducive to the spread of infectious diseases back to rural areas that had never previously been exposed. So for me, that was looking at HIV and how that played into that dynamic and trying to figure out ways in which men who are at such high risk because they're separated from their partners for long periods of time, what kinds of interventions we could implement on the mines and indeed to protect their partners back home. And that interest in migration has been one that's been throughout my career, but it's changing now to look at different sets of issues, which I think is indicative of the way that the HIV epidemic has evolved. So as I described, the first part of that, where I was looking really about the vectors of disease spread, whether the men were spreading it back to their partners or who was infecting who. Now, a lot of the work that we're interested in, and again, because of where we are with the HIV epidemic, is about treatment and access to treatment. And migration is still an incredibly important part of that, because you still have throughout Southern Africa a situation with millions of young people who are on the move for various periods of time. And so how do they access treatment, not only for HIV, but another project that McGarvey and I are working on, but also for non-communicable diseases. These are sets of conditions that are similar in the sense that they now require sort of lifelong treatment. And if you're a mobile person moving between different locations, how do you access that treatment, and how do we make that easy for you? So that's been an ongoing theme, but I think showing how we focus a lot of our work nowadays on accessing treatment and how much of the epidemic and the response to the epidemic is related to that. Similarly, I'm lucky to work with the new postdoc who's going to become a Brown faculty member, who looks at mothers and children, but still the issue of migration. And this is all, by the way, in South Africa. I should have said that, where I'm from and where I do almost all of my work. I've worked in other parts of Africa and other parts of the world, but that's really where I focus. So mothers and children, still this issue of migration is incredibly important, and what she's finding in her early work, Angie Bankston, many of you will meet her in the next year as she transitions to being at Brown, is a lot of movement amongst mothers soon after they deliver. So another colleague of ours has been looking together with us in a little group that's forming around these issues at women who are HIV positive and what happens a sort of year after they deliver, and what happens to their kids, and finding a large number of those kids actually end up not being physically with their mothers, but being cared for by other family members. And so now the next question is, well, what do we know about those family members, and what do they know about the fact that these kids were exposed and exposed to HIV, being that their moms were infected? So it raises lots and lots of issues, but that theme of migration and how it impacts on people's lives is a long-running one for me. The current other projects, my big project now, again, thanks to the taxpayers of the United States, also in Cape Town, is looking at men who are infected with HIV and their access to treatment. So we talk and think a lot about the gendered aspects of the HIV epidemic, and it's true that among many measurements, women are much worse off than men. They're much more vulnerable to getting infected, and at least at young ages, much higher probabilities of infection, much higher prevalence and incidence. But men, actually, it turns out, who are infected are much less likely to get tested. When they're tested, they're much less likely to get on treatment, and when they're on treatment, they're much less likely to adhere to treatment. So our project in Cape Town is looking at ways that we can more efficiently and effectively move men through the treatment cascade to make sure that they're properly and in a timely way connected to services so that they don't fall out or drop out along the way. And part of the way that we're doing that is by harnessing a bunch of different data sets that exist in Cape Town that are sort of kept by different authorities and trying to merge those data sets into a kind of understandable picture of the treatment cascade in one particular health sub-district just outside of Cape Town. So that's men in the treatment cascade. Another project that I have in Cape Town, and many other Brown faculty are involved in this, is mostly a training project, which is a collaboration with the University of Cape Town. And there we're training young South African scientists from MPH students up to junior faculty in methods related to social science to integrate within our understanding of the HIV epidemic. So these are people either who are coming from outside of HIV but have a understanding and a desire to learn social science methods to better understand the HIV epidemic. And that brings me in contact with a lot of projects because all of these fellows who we're mentoring and working with are each individually working on projects. So we have projects there, for instance, looking at the rollout of medical male circumcision in Zimbabwe. We have other projects on masculinity, on a variety of issues in which social science research methods are being brought to understand and respond to the epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa. Am I out of time yet? Almost. Okay, I'll just mention one more. And again, I can talk about these in person, so we don't have to do them in detail. But another long-running thread in my work has been using mathematical models to understand epidemic dynamics. And once you've established that, then to kind of predict into the future what the impact of different interventions might have. So I've done quite a lot of work on that in relation to rolling out of different interventions in sub-Saharan Africa and what the population level impact of those might be. And similarly, we have a PhD student. Also, there's quite a group here within epidemiology, Brandon Marshall and others, who are working on these kind of agent-based models to understand transmission dynamics and intervention impact. And so within that, we have a student, interestingly, who's looking at, in Philadelphia, looking at the HIV epidemic and trying to understand how much of the epidemic relates to incarceration. We know that large proportions of particularly young black males in many urban areas are incarcerated, and that actually brings me full circle because that's a kind of migration process where, just like in South Africa, people are separated from their partners for large periods of time. So we're trying to understand what the impact of that is and how we might intervene in ways that could mitigate that separation and that risk of disease transmission. So that's what I have. Happy to talk to anybody and answer questions if we have time.
Great. Thanks.